I'm going to walk through one aspect of the campaign that we did for the series, but I'm trying to put it in context of just about all kinds of social media marketing and all kinds of brands. A lot of the things that we put to use here can apply to any brand. It doesn't matter, if it's a television series, because the fact of the matter is most brands, the audience or the consumer base for those brands are way larger than 2 million. So there are things to tap into beyond what you would think of as like a typical fan base for a series with a brand. There are passion points, passion groups. There are sponsorships. A lot of brands do things with NASCAR. NASCAR race alone in person attracts sometimes that many people, or so it seems. So there are a lot of ways to reach people, and through social media specifically. But if you want to be successful, I boiled this down into several simple steps to take. One is to know your audience. And I mean know your audience, like almost in the biblical sense. I mean, it is really important to understand how your audience behaves, what kind of media it consumes, what they do for a living, how what they do for a living impacts their personal lives. What they do personally is oftentimes broadcast very publicly. And of course, Facebook has reached a threshold where it's a pretty good representation of what people are talking about or thinking about or what their interests are, and it's at scale. There are lots of other things, like Twitter, which at the time wasn't where it is today. This was about, I would say, 11 or probably 8 months ago, 8 to 9 months ago, but it's even bigger now. And so we knew that we could learn, and that is the first thing that we did. We learned. We looked at the audience as a whole and understand what their habits were, but we also looked to find prototypes. Who in our audience represented, the ideal fan of the show? And oftentimes that's a pretty standard advertising practice. We understand what someone's habits are, and then we give them a name. Meet Alex. He is the ideal IKEA shopper. In this case, we did that ourselves, but we actually found an individual, a real person, and that's her. Her pen name is Dynamo. I don't know what her real name is, but she is can best be described as she's an actress in the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, improv comedy troupe here in New York, but she's also a world-class illustrator and a huge fan of the show. So what we noticed was that sometime during season 2, one of the things that she was doing with her time, in addition to blogging about the show and how wonderful it was also doing illustrations of scenes that happened in the episode prior. So she did things that looked like this. This is a scene done in classic early 60s style illustration, early 60s advertising style. A lot of the car companies were using this style of animation, or illustration rather, and she would do, for example, a scene from the Christmas party, or desktop wallpaper that visitors to her blog started discovering, certainly, sharing, and before you knew it, there were tens of thousands of visitors to her blog every week looking for the next installment of this, what she called Mad Men Illustrated, which is phenomenal, and it really took on a life of its own, which is fascinating considering the show itself is not animated. The show is live action, but these representations started really catching on with fans of the show. Again, with fans of the show, and really a subset of fans of the show that visited her blog. In our research, what we also knew is, and I'll spare you all the details, but I can assure you it was significant, is that the average Mad Men fan has way more social media connections than the average consumer. So there may not be that many of them, but they are highly, highly connected. And probably, if you were to look at them as a media channel, would probably be a more efficient way of reaching several million people than your last ad buy. So we know that was the case as well. So once we understood our audience, understood who potentially prototypical consumer of our product was, the next step was reverse engineering success. So speaking of baseball, we took a very sabermetric approach to this, and if any of you are familiar with the concept of Moneyball, the idea there is that it's an objective way to build a baseball team that engineers it for winning, not necessarily to have the best players on the field, but to win games. And with baseball, the way you win games is by scoring more runs than the opposing team, or by letting up fewer runs than to the opposing team. So with social media, The sabermetric or objective approach to engineering success is understanding how many good consumers that you can create that directly contribute to a win. And everybody, a win to everybody is different. The word engagement even to everybody means something different. But for us, we knew that we had to define what the ideal consumer or ideal viewer of Mad Men looked like. And it wasn't just somebody that put on the show or turned on the show. It was something more than that. And I guess, step 2.5 was once we did that, is learning what the customer that you want to create behaves like. Take the time to research and model. So we did. We did a lot of research, a lot of behavioral modeling, and we learned a lot of interesting things. And just 2 really quick examples were we had done a study with Yahoo called Engage and Entertain. And the idea for the study was to understand what kinds of online engagements make somebody more likely to be the ideal television viewer. And we had a lot of different criteria that made up what the ideal television viewer was. But one of them, for example, is someone that watched the show loyally every week when it aired. This was a classic example of a television show being a water cooler type of discussion. So we knew that it was important to get people to watch this on Sunday nights because it was going to be a subject of conversation at the office on Monday morning. So what kinds of online engagements made this kind of behavior occur, and then how much more likely, I should say, did it make somebody to become that kind of viewer? So for a returning show, for example, in Mad Men's case, it was twice as likely to watch the show every week when it aired, non-time shifted, non-DVR'd. We also knew that pre-engagement with a show before it aired in lots of different capacities made people more likely to convince more people to watch the show. That goes a step beyond influence, actually. The question that we asked was, did you convince somebody to watch the show, not just influence? And for a returning show, people that engaged with show-related content right before it aired were more likely to influence 1.5 more people on average, which is a key metric, because if we wanted to increase the number of people that tuned into the premiere by 1 million, we knew that we had to tap into some pretty influential folks to make that happen. So the last part, or the last stage in our process before we actually launched something, was understanding how easy that we could make it for our best customers to create more better customers. You can buy good customers, obviously, if you have endless supplies of money, which I can assure you that our clients don't. If you do, I'll be available later. But what we did know is that we needed to take our best customers and turn them into best customer getters. So we did that. And the way we did that was creating this initiative called Mad Men Yourself. It's an experience, and it's not all too unfamiliar to people that have spent more than 20 minutes on the web. Which is probably a good thing. So the idea about Mad Men Yourself was to basically create a visual representation of yourself in early 60s style illustration. And if these illustrations look familiar, it's because you saw them earlier. So we actually hired a fan of the show to create these illustrations. We knew that they were catching on in a big way with a small subset of people, but we knew that we could artificially create a tipping point for her work. And by the way, AMC wound up licensing out her work and using it on a lot of packaging for the show, and it's in the DVD and all kinds of great stuff. But this is putting our fans to work for the brand. So Dynamo created all of these permutations. Literally everyone is hand designed. None of this is automated. So this isn't like, putting Voltron together. Every one of these is individually hand-drawn. So it took a while to create, mind you. And the attention to detail was one of those things that attracted a lot of people to it. So within the first few hours that this launched, it started to gain some steam. People were talking about it. People were exporting images of themselves, for example, in a seedy bar, or a picnic, or the lobby area of Sterling Cooper, which is the agency in the show. But this is what made it happen. This is what made everything work. We made it very, very, very easy to export the output of this 5-minute or so experience, if you really took the time, to make it look like yourself, which people did. It's really not all too unfamiliar for anyone that's turned on a Nintendo Wii, for example, and customized your Mii character, or worked in an Xbox Live situation. This is learned behavior. Elf yourself, Simpsonize yourself. So again, behavior that people already were familiar with. But what was different was the ability to make a representation of yourself that could live in a company every single piece of content that you created within social media.